Rain poured heavily across the open land, washing the dust off the long road that led to Ethan Ward's ranch. The night sky was dark, filled with thunder and flashes of lightning. On that lonely road walked a young woman named Emma. Her clothes were wet, her hair stuck to her face, and her shoes were covered in mud. She carried a small, worn-out suitcase and looked lost, frightened and tired. Her eyes searched for shelter until she saw the faint glow of a lamp through the rain. It came from a small wooden house at the edge of a wide ranch. She hesitated at first. She didn't know who lived there, and she had nowhere else to go. Her heart was pounding as she stepped onto the porch and knocked softly. No one answered. She knocked again, harder this time. A few moments later, the door creaked open and a tall man stood there with a lantern in his hand. He had a rugged face, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that showed both kindness and caution. His voice was deep when he asked, "What are you doing out here at this hour, miss?" Emma shivered, unable to speak for a second. Then with trembling lips she said, "Please, sir, I just need a place to stay for tonight. I'll work for it. I can clean, cook, feed the animals, anything. Please, I'll do anything if you just let me stay." Ethan looked at her closely. She was soaked to the bone, shaking from cold and exhaustion. He wasn't the kind of man who liked strangers, especially not on a stormy night. But something about her eyes caught his heart. They weren't just desperate. They were full of quiet strength, as if she had been fighting a long battle alone. "Come in," he finally said. His voice was calm, but his heart felt uneasy. He didn't know her story, and he didn't want trouble. Yet leaving her outside in that storm felt wrong. He stepped aside, and she entered the warm glow of the old ranch house. The house was simple but clean. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, filling the air with a soft crackling sound. The smell of coffee and wood smoke made the place feel alive. Emma stood by the fire, her hands near the warmth, while Ethan fetched a towel and a blanket. She whispered a small thank you before wrapping herself tightly. He poured her a cup of coffee and placed it on the table. She looked down at it like it was the most precious thing she had ever seen. Her fingers shook as she held the cup, taking small sips. Ethan finally sat across from her and asked, "So where are you coming from?" Emma's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "From the city," she said softly. "I used to work at a diner, but it closed down. My rent went up and I couldn't pay anymore. Then my father, he passed away. I have no family left and I couldn't find work anywhere." Her voice cracked as she looked at him. "I've been walking for days, sir. I heard people around here sometimes hire help for their ranches. I can do anything you need, please. Just give me a chance." Her words were full of pain but also honesty. Ethan leaned back in his chair thinking. He didn't like to hire people without knowing their background, and his ranch hadn't needed extra hands in a while. Yet something about her made him hesitate to say no. He saw how her eyes shone with courage even through her tears. "You can stay for the night," he finally said. "But we'll see about the rest in the morning." Emma nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. "Thank you, sir. I promise I won't cause any trouble." He gave her a small smile. "You can call me Ethan." She nodded again. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan." As the night grew colder, Ethan brought her a bowl of soup and watched her eat slowly. He noticed how she whispered small thanks before every bite. The rain outside never stopped, hitting the roof in steady rhythm. After she finished, she looked at him shyly and said, "You live here alone?" Ethan nodded. "For a long time now. The ranch keeps me busy enough." He didn't tell her more, but behind those few words was a story of his own. He had once shared the house with his wife, but she had passed away years ago in an accident that changed him forever. Since then, he had closed his heart and learned to live with silence. When Emma's eyes started to close from exhaustion, Ethan led her to the small guest room down the hall. "It's not much," he said, "but it's warm and dry." "It's perfect," she whispered. "I haven't slept in a real bed for weeks." Before closing the door, she turned to him and said something he didn't expect. "Thank you, sir, I mean it. You didn't have to help me, but you did." "I won't forget it," Ethan gave a small nod. "Rest now. We'll talk tomorrow." He walked back to the living room and stood by the window. The storm outside was still wild, but inside there was peace. The warmth of the fire filled the room, and for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel completely alone. Upstairs, Emma lay on the soft pillow, feeling warmth return to her tired body. She couldn't stop thinking about the man downstairs, the quiet cowboy who had opened his door to a stranger. She had met many people who turned her away, but something about him was different. He didn't say much, yet his actions spoke louder than any words. She whispered softly to herself, "I'll work hard. I'll make him proud." Downstairs, Ethan poured himself another cup of coffee. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was she, really? Why had life been so cruel to someone so young? He didn't have answers, but one thing was clear. There was something strong in her spirit. Something he hadn't seen in years. When the storm finally calmed, the ranch grew quiet. Ethan looked once more toward the guest room door and sighed. He had spent many nights alone, but tonight felt different. He didn't know why, but somehow he felt that this woman's arrival would change everything. The next morning would bring questions, decisions, and maybe even new beginnings. But for now, the old cowboy sat in silence, watching the fire flicker low, unaware that fate had just stepped across his doorstep in the form of a girl with a broken past and an unbroken heart. And in that quiet house on a stormy night, two lives, one weary from loss and one trembling from hardship, had unknowingly taken the first step toward healing. The sun rose slowly over the hills, turning the wet grass into fields of gold. Birds chirped softly and the smell of fresh rain filled the air. Ethan stepped outside early, his boots crunching against the damp ground. He had been awake before dawn, feeding the horses and checking the fences. But something about this morning felt different. There was a quiet warmth around the ranch that hadn't been there in years. Maybe it was because there was finally someone else in the house again, someone who had brought life back into it. When Ethan came back inside, he was surprised to see Emma already awake. She was in the kitchen trying to start a fire in the old stove. Her hair was tied back neatly, her clothes still a bit large on her small frame, but her face showed determination. She smiled shyly when she saw him. "Good morning, Mr. Ethan," she said. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to make breakfast for you to thank you for last night." Ethan leaned against the doorway, crossing his arms. "You don't have to do that," he said. "You're my guest." "I want to," she replied gently. "You gave me a roof when I had nowhere to go. Let me help somehow." Ethan couldn't argue with that. He gave a small nod and watched as she moved carefully around the kitchen. She wasn't fast, but she was precise. He noticed how she wiped the counter twice, stirred the eggs slowly, and checked the stove's flame like someone who wanted to do everything right. When she finally placed 2 plates on the table, Ethan sat down quietly. The food wasn't fancy, just eggs, bread, and a bit of milk, but it smelled better than anything he'd had in a long time. They ate mostly in silence. Emma was nervous, glancing up at him from time to time. Ethan finally said, "You cook well." She smiled, her cheeks pink. "Thank you, sir. My father taught me before he passed away. He used to say, if you can cook a meal that warms the heart, you'll never be alone." Ethan nodded slowly, feeling a strange ache in his chest. "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was," she said softly. "He worked hard all his life. I wish I could have done more for him." After breakfast, Ethan stood up. "You said you were looking for work. I could use some help around the ranch, but I can't pay much right now." Emma's eyes lit up. "I don't care about money, sir. I just want to work. Please let me stay." He studied her face. She looked sincere, almost pleading, but there was also strength there, something unbroken despite all she'd been through. "All right," he said finally. "We'll try it out for a week. You help around and we'll see how it goes." Emma smiled with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan. I promise you won't regret it." The day went by quickly. Ethan showed her the barn, the chicken coop, and the fenced areas where the cattle grazed. The land stretched far in every direction, quiet and beautiful. Emma listened carefully, nodding at every instruction. She wasn't afraid of hard work. She helped him carry hay, cleaned the stalls, and even tried her hand at milking one of the cows, though it made her laugh when the cow flicked its tail in her face. Ethan found himself smiling, too. He hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Watching her work reminded him of the early days when he and his late wife had built the ranch together. He could almost hear his wife's laughter in the wind. It made his chest heavy, but it also made him realize how long it had been since he'd felt any kind of warmth in his heart. Around midday, Emma tried to fix a broken fence post by herself. Ethan told her to wait, but she insisted she could do it. She lifted the hammer and struck the nail, but the wood slipped, and the hammer hit her hand instead. She gasped, dropping it. Ethan hurried over. "Let me see," he said firmly. "It's fine," she said quickly, hiding her hand behind her back. He frowned. "Emma, show me." When she hesitated, he gently took her hand and looked at it. Her skin was scraped, a little swollen. He sighed and shook his head. "You're too stubborn for your own good," she laughed softly. "Maybe, but I don't like giving up." He walked her back to the porch, brought a small first aid box, and carefully wrapped her hand with a bandage. His touch was rough but gentle, and she noticed how his hands were covered in calluses from years of hard work. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I can't have my worker breaking her hand on the first day," he replied with a hint of a smile. The word worker made her heart swell with pride. It meant he trusted her enough to keep her around. That evening, when the sun started to sink behind the hills, Ethan asked her to join him on the porch. He brought out 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. The air was cool and the sky glowed orange and pink. They sat side by side, watching the colors fade into night. "You did well today," Ethan said quietly. "Thank you," she replied. It felt good to be useful again. Ethan nodded, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "This ranch, it hasn't been the same since my wife passed. I tried to keep it going, but some days it's hard to even wake up. Having another person around, it changes things." Emma looked down, touched by his honesty. "I understand, sir. Losing someone you love, it leaves an empty space that nothing seems to fill." He looked at her, surprised by her calm tone. "You speak like someone who's been through it," she smiled sadly. "When my father died, it felt like the world went silent. I didn't know how to go on. But I remembered what he used to tell me. Don't stop moving, Emma. Life keeps going, and so should you." Ethan's eyes softened. He was right. They sat quietly after that, listening to the wind move through the trees. It wasn't awkward silence, it was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt that someone truly understood what it meant to live with loss and still keep going. When night came, Emma went to her room and stood by the small window, looking out at the fields glowing faintly under the moonlight. She felt tired, but it was the good kind of tired that comes after honest work. She thought about Ethan, the quiet, kind man who had given her a chance when no one else would. She promised herself she would never waste that chance. Downstairs, Ethan sat by the fire again. He thought about how easily the girl had blended into the ranch, how naturally she worked and how soft her presence felt in his empty home. Maybe it was too early to say, but he felt something change inside him. For years the house had been silent. Now there were footsteps, soft humming, and the smell of fresh food again. Before going to bed, he looked at the old photograph of his wife on the mantel. "You'd like her," he whispered quietly. "She's strong." The fire crackled, and he felt a small, unexpected peace. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain and fresh hay. Upstairs, Emma was already asleep, dreaming of a new beginning she had never thought possible. And for the first time in a long while, both the cowboy and the girl slept peacefully under the same roof, each unaware that this simple bond of kindness and trust would soon grow into something neither of them had planned, but both had deeply needed. The days passed quietly on the ranch, one after another, and Emma soon became a part of its rhythm. She woke before sunrise every morning, tying her hair back and slipping into her work boots. Ethan would already be outside, checking the fences or saddling his horse. He never needed to tell her what to do. She learned quickly and did what needed to be done. She gathered eggs from the chicken coop, fed the horses, and made breakfast before the sun was fully up. The smell of fresh coffee and biscuits filled the kitchen each morning, and Ethan had started to look forward to it more than he wanted to admit. He had grown used to loneliness for so long that having someone around felt strange at first. But Emma's presence was quiet and comforting. She didn't talk too much, didn't ask unnecessary questions, and never complained. She was strong but gentle, and she treated the ranch like it was her own home. Ethan noticed the difference she was making. The barn looked cleaner, the tools were in order, and even the animals seemed calmer when she was near. One morning, while she was brushing the horses, Ethan walked over carrying a bucket of oats. "You've got away with them," he said, watching how the big brown mare leaned into Emma's touch. Emma smiled softly. "Animals are easier than people," she said. "They don't judge you. They just know when you care." Ethan nodded. "That's true." For a moment they stood in silence. Then he added, "You're doing good work here, Emma, better than I expected." Her eyes brightened. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." He almost told her to stop calling him sir. but the words sounded so polite coming from her that he didn't correct her. Later that afternoon, a few of the ranch hands rode in from town. They were rough but friendly men who worked the outer fields. When they saw Emma, they tipped their hats politely. One of them, a younger cowboy named Luke, grinned and said, "Didn't know the boss finally hired some help." "You sure work fast, miss." Emma blushed, brushing the dirt off her hands. "Just doing what I can," she said modestly. Ethan stepped forward, his tone firm but kind. "She's working hard, Luke. You could learn a thing or two from her." The men chuckled and Luke raised his hands playfully. "All right, boss. I didn't mean nothing by it." That night, after everyone had gone, Emma helped Ethan put away tools in the barn. The air was cool, filled with the scent of hay and earth. She looked up at the stars peeking through the open loft window. "You know," she said softly, "I used to dream of living somewhere peaceful like this. In the city, everything is loud. People rush, fight, and forget how to breathe." Ethan paused, looking at her with interest. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I can finally breathe again." He didn't say anything, but those words stayed with him. Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side from morning till evening. Emma helped plant new grass seed, learned how to ride one of the calmer horses, and even joined Ethan when he drove cattle from one field to another. She was clumsy at first, but she never gave up. Ethan found himself watching her sometimes, how determined she looked when she concentrated, how her laughter made even the hard days feel lighter. But not every day was easy. One evening, a sudden storm rolled over the land again. The wind howled and the rain came down fast. Ethan ran outside to bring in the horses, but one of the barn doors had blown open. The wind was so strong that it was hard to pull it shut. Without hesitation, Emma ran out after him, soaked in seconds. "Go back inside." He shouted. "I'm not leaving you out here," she yelled back. Together, they fought the storm, struggling to secure the door. Lightning flashed across the sky and thunder shook the ground. Finally, with one last push, they managed to close it. Both of them stood there, breathing hard, drenched from head to toe. Ethan looked at her, mud on her face, hair plastered to her skin, but her eyes were alive with courage. "You shouldn't have come out," he said, trying to sound stern. "You needed help," she replied simply. "That's what people do, they help each other." He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a small, tired smile. "You're something else, Emma." The next morning, the storm had passed and the ranch was calm again. The grass sparkled with dew and the world felt clean and new. Emma brought him breakfast as he sat on the porch watching the sunrise. He thanked her quietly. She smiled and sat beside him, both of them enjoying the peaceful silence. After a while, she asked softly, "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Why did you start this ranch? You could have lived in town or anywhere else." He looked at the horizon for a long moment before answering. "This ranch was my wife's dream. She loved the open land, the quiet, the feeling of working with her own hands. When she passed, I couldn't leave. It felt like walking away from her." Emma lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded. "It's all right. It's been years now. I've learned to live with it. But for a long time I stopped living. I just existed." There was a pause before she said, "I know that feeling. After my father died, it felt like I was standing still while the world kept moving. But coming here, it's like life started again." Ethan turned to her. "You've got strength, Emma. Don't lose it." She smiled, her eyes soft. "Maybe I found it here." From that day on, something quiet and unspoken grew between them. It wasn't love yet, but it was trust. It was a kind of understanding that words couldn't describe. Ethan started to share more with her. Small stories about his younger days, the first horse he ever trained, the mistakes he made and what he learned from them. Emma listened closely, always with genuine care. In return, she told him about her father's kindness, her life in the city, and how hard it was to keep hope alive when everything around her fell apart. One evening, they were fixing a fence near the north field. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at her. "You've done more in 1 month than most workers do in 3. "I can't thank you enough." "You already did," she said. "You gave me a home when I had nothing. I'm the one who should thank you." He looked at her quietly for a few seconds, his chest tight with emotion. He wanted to say something more, but words didn't seem enough. Instead, he nodded and said, "Well, you've earned your place here. Don't think of yourself as a worker anymore. You're part of this ranch now. Emma's eyes filled with tears she quickly wiped away. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan. That means everything to me." As the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood together surrounded by open land and the sound of crickets. Neither spoke, but both felt the same thing: peace, connection, and the strange comfort of finding someone who understood without needing to explain. That night, when Emma went to bed, she smiled to herself. For the first time in years, she felt safe. And downstairs, Ethan sat by the fire, thinking about how that lost girl who had shown up at his door on a stormy night had brought warmth back into his cold world. Neither of them said it out loud, but both knew deep inside their lives were beginning to change, slowly and beautifully, like dawn breaking after a long, dark night. Winter came quietly to the ranch, blanketing the fields with frost and coating the wooden fences with ice. The mornings were colder than usual, and the wind cut through even the thickest coats. Yet despite the chill, the ranch was alive with activity. Emma rose earlier than ever, determined to help Ethan keep the place running smoothly. She carried buckets of water before the sun was fully up, brushing snow off the stable doors and checking the horses' hooves to make sure they weren't frozen. She moved with purpose, her breath forming clouds in the cold air, and Ethan watched her from the porch, a quiet admiration in his eyes. "Cold enough for you?" he asked, joining her with a bucket in hand. Emma shook her head, smiling despite the frost on her eyelashes. "It's fine, sir. I'm used to working in rough conditions." Ethan chuckled softly. "You're tougher than I thought." They spent the morning feeding the cattle and making sure the fences held against the ice and snow. Emma's hands were raw and red from the cold, but she never complained. When Ethan suggested taking a break, she simply shook her head. "There's still more to do. We can rest after everything is done." By midday, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale light across the ranch. Emma helped him fix broken gates and patch weak spots in the fences. Even the barn needed work. Some of the boards had cracked under the weight of the frost, and the roof had small leaks. She climbed up carefully, hammer in hand, while Ethan steadied the boards below. Together they worked silently, communicating only with nods or soft words. It was exhausting, but they were a team. Ethan began to notice how naturally she handled the horses, how carefully she measured the feed, and how she could sense when an animal was uneasy. She didn't just work, she cared, and that made all the difference. After the long morning, Emma was wiping sweat from her forehead when she suddenly stumbled, her foot slipping on the icy floor near the barn. Ethan grabbed her just in time to keep her from falling. "Careful," he said, steadying her. "I'm fine," she said quickly, brushing herself off. But her hand grazed a nail and a thin line of blood appeared. Ethan frowned, grabbing the first aid kit again. He knelt beside her, gently cleaning the cut and wrapping it with a bandage. She winced but didn't complain. "You've been through so much already," he said softly. "Don't push yourself too hard." "I can handle it," she replied. "I've been handling hard things my whole life. This is nothing compared to that." He studied her, struck by her courage and her quiet determination. "You really are something special, Emma," he said. Days turned into weeks, and Emma grew more comfortable in her role on the ranch. She knew the routines, could handle the horses alone, and even started cooking meals that warmed the heart. Ethan watched her, noticing little things, the way she hummed while working, the careful way she arranged the kitchen, and how she always remembered the smallest details. One evening, a harsh snowstorm hit the ranch. The wind rattled the windows and the cold seeped into every corner. Ethan had to go outside to check the fences, and Emma followed him without hesitation. Together, they trudged through deep snow, securing gates and making sure the animals were safe. The storm was relentless, and at one point, Emma slipped and fell, the snow pressing against her face. Ethan pulled her up quickly. "You didn't have to come out here," he said, concern etched on his face. "I wanted to help," she said, her voice determined. "You can't do everything alone." Ethan shook his head, a small smile breaking through his worry. "You're fearless." By the time they returned to the house, soaked and frozen, they were both exhausted. Ethan lit a fire in the fireplace, and Emma helped him dry the blankets and wrap them around the animals. They worked side by side, each silently grateful for the other's presence. Later that night, Emma fell ill. The cold had caught up with her, and she shivered violently under the blankets. Ethan refused to leave her side, fetching warm tea, rubbing her hands, and keeping the fire strong. When she whispered, "I'm fine. I'll be okay," he shook his head. "You're not fine. You've been working too hard. Let me take care of you for once. She looked at him, her eyes soft. Thank you for everything. He stayed with her through the night, never letting her drift too far into sleep without checking her temperature, adjusting her blankets, or giving her small sips of tea. In the quiet of the room, they shared a silence that felt more intimate than any words could convey. Ethan realized that the girl he had taken in weeks ago had become someone he couldn't imagine the ranch without. When Emma finally rested, Ethan sat back, exhausted but relieved. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth. He thought about how far she had come, from a desperate, trembling girl at his door to someone who had proven herself capable, brave, and kind. He realized that he had also changed. The house no longer felt empty. The ranch no longer felt lonely. And his heart, long closed, had begun to open. The next morning, Emma woke feeling better. She helped Ethan with the morning chores again, though more slowly than usual. He watched her carefully, making sure she didn't overexert herself. When the work was done, they sat on the porch together, the snow still glistening under the pale morning sun. You did well, Ethan said quietly, sipping his coffee. Emma smiled. I feel like I'm finally part of something. Not just surviving, but living, he nodded. That's how I feel too. This ranch, it's been lonely for a long time. Having you here, it's different, better. They shared a quiet moment, looking out over the frozen fields. Neither spoke, but the bond between them had grown stronger, built on trust, care, and the shared struggle of long, hard days. As winter pressed on, the ranch slowly recovered from the harsh season. Gates were repaired, fences reinforced, and the animals thrived. Emma's hands grew calloused and strong, and she became more confident in her work. Ethan found himself depending on her more than he expected, and he realized that she had become not just a worker, but a partner in running the ranch. One evening, as they closed the barn for the night, Ethan looked at Emma and said, "You've changed this place, Emma, more than I can say." Emma looked at him, warmth in her eyes. "And you've changed me too, sir. I feel like I belong here." Ethan smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good, because you do. You really do." That night, as Emma lay in her bed, she reflected on the months she had spent on the ranch. She thought about the stormy night when she first arrived, the hard work she had done, and the quiet kindness of the man who had given her a chance. She realized that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was growing, learning, and healing. And Ethan, too, was slowly learning to live again, not just exist. Outside, the wind whispered across the fields, carrying the scent of pine and frost. Inside, the ranch was warm with firelight, laughter, and the quiet, steady rhythm of two lives beginning to heal together. Emma drifted to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of work, challenges, and progress. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready for it, confident that whatever came, she wouldn't face it alone. Ethan downstairs stared at the fire, feeling the same certainty. The ranch, the storms, and their hardships had brought them together in a way neither expected, but both were grateful for. Winter had tested them, but it had also taught them something important: courage. Trust and care could create warmth even in the coldest of places, and together they were stronger than either had ever imagined. Spring arrived at the ranch with a gentle warmth that melted the frost and turned the fields into a soft, glowing green. Birds sang loudly in the trees, and the smell of fresh grass and wildflowers filled the air. The sun rose earlier, and with it came the sense of renewal that Emma and Ethan both felt deep in their hearts. After the harsh winter, the ranch had survived, even thrived, and the hard work of the past months showed in every corner. The fences were strong, the barn sturdy, and the animals healthy. Emma woke early, as always, her heart light with purpose. She tied her hair back, pulled on her boots, and stepped out into the soft morning light. Ethan was already out, examining the fields and checking the water troughs. The ranch had returned to its rhythm, and they moved within it together as a seamless team. Emma carried buckets of water to the barn, tending to the horses and cleaning the stalls. Her hands were strong, her movements confident, and her smile came easily now. She no longer felt the fear or hopelessness that had marked her arrival months before. Ethan watched her quietly from the porch. He had learned to rely on her more than he thought he would. Her presence had brought life back into the ranch, but it had also brought life back into him. Where there had once been silence and routine, Now there was laughter, conversation, and the quiet hum of companionship. He smiled softly, watching her guide a young colt gently back into its stall, whispering soothing words as she brushed its coat. "You've done well," he said when she turned to him, a small smile on her face. Emma blushed and looked down at her boots. "We've done well, sir. The ranch. It's doing better because of all the work we've both put in." He nodded, the pride in his voice quiet but steady. "It's more than just work. You've made this place feel alive again. That's not something easy to do." She looked up at him, a soft light in her eyes. "I didn't know I could belong somewhere like this until I came here. I feel like this is home now." The word home carried weight for Ethan. He had lived alone for so long that the thought of it being shared with someone else had seemed impossible. But with Emma, it felt natural, comfortable, right. The rest of the morning passed quickly. They worked side by side, tending to the animals, fixing small damages from the winter, and cleaning the barn. Emma had grown so confident in her work that Ethan rarely needed to check on her. She handled every task with care, her focus steady, her energy tireless. When the ranch hands arrived later that day, they noticed the difference too. The place was more organized, the animals calmer, and the routine smoother. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ethan and Emma walked together across the fields. The sky was painted with gold and pink, and the soft hum of the evening wind made the world feel peaceful. For a long time, neither spoke, simply enjoying the calm after a day of hard work. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said softly. "A place where people care, where work means something, and where I don't feel alone." Ethan's gaze softened as he looked at her. "It took a lot to get here. You've been through so much, Emma, and yet, here you are, stronger than when you arrived, braver than I expected." She smiled faintly. "And you've been brave too, sir. You opened your door to me when no one else would. You trusted me before you even knew me." He shook his head, a small laugh escaping him. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't leave you out there. Not after seeing the rain and how tired you were. Something told me you'd fight for every chance you got." They continued walking, the grass wet beneath their boots, the air warm and fresh. Ethan stopped and looked at the horizon, the fading light reflecting in his eyes. "You've changed this ranch," he said quietly, "and I think you've changed me too." Emma looked at him, her heart swelling. "I think we've changed each other," she said softly. "We've helped each other grow." He nodded, unable to find more words, but his eyes said everything. He didn't need to speak it aloud. The silence between them was full of meaning. Over the next few weeks, life on the ranch continued to flourish. Emma was now fully accepted as part of the family. She cooked, cleaned, tended to the animals, and even helped with the books and supplies. Ethan watched her grow more confident each day, more at ease with herself and her surroundings. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, was now full of energy and warmth. One day, as they repaired a fence together, Ethan paused, leaning on the post he was holding. "Emma," he said quietly, "I want you to know, I didn't just hire you to help me with the ranch. I'm glad you're here, for me and for this place." Emma looked at him, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. "I'm glad too," she whispered. "I've never felt this way before. I feel safe, respected, and happy." The bond between them had grown stronger than either could have imagined. It was not based on necessity or pity, but on trust, care, and the shared experiences of long days and quiet nights. They had faced storms together, endured hardships, and supported each other in ways that went beyond words. That evening, as they sat on the porch with mugs of warm tea, the sky painted with the soft colors of sunset, Ethan finally allowed himself to relax fully. He realized that life, once heavy and lonely, had become lighter, brighter, and more meaningful because of her. Emma, sitting beside him, felt the same. She had arrived at the ranch broken and weary, but she now carried a sense of hope, confidence, and belonging that she had never thought possible. The world outside the ranch continued to move, but within the wooden walls of the home, with the field stretching endlessly in front of them, there was peace. Emma and Ethan had built more than a functioning ranch. They had built trust, friendship, and the beginnings of something much deeper. As night fell, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the room. Emma looked out the window at the stars twinkling above the open fields. She felt gratitude for the life she now had, for the chance Ethan had given her, and for the bond they had formed. Ethan, standing nearby, watched her silently. He knew the future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time he felt ready to face it. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of life, warmth, and connection, and the girl who had arrived months ago, wet and trembling at his doorstep, had brought all of that back into his world. They had found each other in the most unexpected way, and together, they had created a new beginning. The ranch, the animals, the long days of hard work, they had all become a testament to hope, trust, and the power of kindness. And as they looked out at the open fields, both knew that their journey was only just beginning, but that whatever came next, they would face it together. The wind whispered across the land, carrying the scent of spring and renewal. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the quiet laughter that sometimes escaped between them filled the house. For the first time in years, the ranch felt like a true home, and both Ethan and Emma felt deep in their hearts that they had finally found a place where they belonged. The days ahead promised more work, more challenges, and more moments that would test their strength. But they also promised companionship, trust, and the quiet, steady rhythm of life shared between two people who had discovered that second chances could be real. And sometimes, they were even better than anyone could have imagined.